Okay, today I'd like to share with you something I call the life-death ratio. This video is going to be for those of you who are maybe a little more mathematically minded. If you're not mathematically minded, just keep watching. You might still get something out of it. I'm sure you will. Probably. I don't know. This is a little illustration that I found personally helpful. Hopefully it's helpful to you. This illustration is just to kind of help get a certain perspective on life. Hopefully it'll become a little clearer to you as we go along. But the equation basically goes like this. It's life over death. The amount of years you're going to be alive over the amount of years that you are going to be dead. Now, let's just say you make it to 100 years old. I personally am not really expecting to make it that long. My wife doesn't like to hear me talk about that, but I think the going record for males in my family is like 65 or something like that. It's not real high, so, we'll see, I guess. But let's just say you make it to 100, okay? How long are you going to be dead for? Well, the answer is forever. So the years that you are alive and the years that you are dead form a ratio, and all we have to do is start plugging in numbers to see what that ratio is. So if you've been alive for 100 years and you're dead for 1 year, you do the math, the ratio comes to 100, right? Let's say you've been dead for 100 years. Do the math. What does it come down to? 1. 100 divided by 100 is 1, right? How about 1,000 years? When you've been dead 1,000 years, what does it come down to? Well, now it's starting to get lower. It's 0.1 now. If you do 10,000 years, it's 0.01. So you can do this ad nauseum. You can do it by 100,000 years, a million years, a billion years, a trillion years. It goes on and on and on forever. Now, this ratio can be written as a calculus equation. Big shout out to my high school calculus teacher, Mrs. Bailey. Never thought I'd ever use calculus ever in my life, and I was wrong. Here we are. This is the one instance where I used it. No shade to Mrs. Bailey. She's a great teacher, and I really enjoyed her class. I learned a lot, and she was definitely one of the best teachers I've ever had in my life. So just a quick shout out, Mrs. Bailey. If you're watching somehow by some miracle, this one's for you. But basically it looks like this. As death approaches infinity equals 0. Now what does that mean exactly? So no matter how long you live, the fact that it is going to be some finite number, and the fact that death goes to infinity, if you chart out all the points, it's going to look something like this chart here, where the line keeps going, it never actually touches 0. But for all intents and purposes, it's basically 0. And that chart applies to absolutely everybody, no matter how long or short you live. Now that we've done this little math lesson, the question is, well, what does that mean for us exactly? Well, basically what it means is that this life boils down to 0, essentially. This life is finite, and by virtue of the fact that eternity goes on forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever, this life becomes very insignificant in as far as this life goes. So to make the deeper point here, if you live this life in just like the most unbelievable luxury possible, every single moment is just waking bliss and it never is bad, but it leads to a detrimental eternity, then all that goodness boils down to basically 0. It's basically worthless. Conversely, if you spend every waking moment in this life suffering, like total misery, terrible life, all whatever that looks like to you, but it leads to a better eternity, then all that suffering basically boils down to nothing as well. It's totally worth it because it leads to a better eternity. Now, if you're an atheist, this is basically what leads to nihilism, because the atheists don't believe that anything happens after we die. We're just dead forever, so all we have is this life. So no matter whether you prosper or whether you suffer, it really doesn't mean anything because you're going to die and then it's over and who cares, you know? That is the conclusion that the nihilists more or less reach. However, if you're a Christian like I am, you believe in God and you believe that there's an afterlife and there's an eternity that we're going to be living, whether it's in heaven or in hell. Furthermore, for those who go to heaven, there are rewards that are stored up for them by God. And what we do in this life is going to affect our rewards in the next life. Now, I don't know exactly what God has prepared for us, but I know that God doesn't give bad gifts. And I'm sure when we get to heaven that we're going to wish that we had done more, because what we do in this life directly affects the next one. I really think that, we spend so much time worrying about, Rufio, you don't know anything about this subject. You're killing me, dude. Rufio, don't touch don't touch that, okay? Rufio, you can come up here with me if you want. I think very often we get hung up on the troubles of this life, and don't get me wrong, some of them are really troubling and difficult to go through. I'm not saying they aren't. But sometimes we wish we had somebody else's life. Sometimes we wish that we weren't going through the things that we were going through. Sometimes we wish that we could just be comfortable in this life and never have any sort of worries or problems or hurts or anything like that. But God often uses those things in our lives to promote growth in our lives and to help others as well. Serving God is not always easy. A lot of times it's hard. Oftentimes it takes a lot of giving of ourselves and making ourselves available. But it's good to keep in mind that this life is temporary. It's going to end. In Psalm 90, Moses actually writes in verse 12, "So teach us to number our days that we may get a heart of wisdom." Wisdom is basically the knowledge of how we should live. And keeping in mind the fact that this life is so temporary is key in order to make sure that we live the way that we should. So anyway, like I said, this is what my time in high school calculus has led to. Sometimes you know these things, but sometimes when you shake it a certain way, it rattles a little differently. So yeah, hopefully this connects with some of you out there. If you have any questions, comments, as always, just leave them in the comments section below. If there's any other topics you want me to cover, let me know. If you want to see more of these, subscribe. If you think this is helpful, this would be helpful for somebody else, feel free to share it. You guys know the drill. I'm going to tell you. So thanks again for watching. I'll see you in the next one.